Go through and break down each one of these groups. So I've got my kick and my snare. I have my favorite clipper is called standard clip. You don't need this, but it is like a nice toy. But then I have my saturator, and if you change this view to soft clip, then I'm actually driving the input to start to clip the signal a little bit. So let's just hear what that sounds like. And if I turn off the saturator, now with it on, you can see there's this little light that's blinking. I'm not clipping it too hard. I just want to catch those peaks a little bit. And then I'm actually turning down the output, which is like proper gain staging, right? I don't want to start smashing all the volume from out of the gate. I'm actually, a lot of times with my devices on these inserts of these tracks, I'm like turning down the output to compensate for me boosting inside of these different devices in the chain. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a little bit of clipping. Then I got a limiter, and the limiter is I pull down the threshold until I start to get a little bit of this gain reduction right here. And then you can kind of see what that's looking like. We have an output knob. When you turn on maximize, a lot of limiters have auto gain, so they're actually boosting while they're compressing. So they're making stuff quieter and then just turning up the output volume at the same time. That's what a lot of limiters do. So when you turn on maximize, that's what's happening. So the output, I actually want to change it to minus 0.03. I'm creating that ceiling because what happens is, or minus 0.2 is fine. If you have a limiter at 0 and you're slamming it really hard, which I'm not really doing here, but if you do that sometimes on limiters, you can create intersample peaks, which basically just means when that goes to like speakers on big systems in the analog world from this digital computer, you're going to have sometimes some weird peaks and distortion and artifacts in your sound that's not super pleasing. It just can make for a sad day. So that's why a lot of for the output on limiters, I usually don't just go straight 0. I'll duck it a little bit just to prevent any accidents from going past 0, which will create that intersample peak. The other thing is you could soft clip here on a limiter if you wanted to, or you could do true peak. I usually go to standard if I'm just limiting, unless I'm trying to clip, which we're already doing here. One quick visual reference that can be helpful is you can see what's actually happening to a waveform. This is with no clipping or peaking, or no limiting or clipping. And then you can see clipping here, you're actually just like giving a haircut to the actual waveform. You're cutting it in kind of an aggressive way. If you clip something too hard, you can definitely tell what's going on. It's destroying the waveform. It sounds aggressive, sounds crunchy, sometimes in a bad way. But a little bit of clipping can distort the signal and actually make stuff a little bit louder because you're adding distortion like you do for like a guitar with a guitar pedal. And then we have limiter. So if you have a limiter, it's actually preserving the waveform. It's not really distorting or clipping. It's actually just squishing the sound. So it's making the loudest stuff here quieter and kind of keeping it glued together. So that's basically the difference if you didn't know. Little 101 tip for you, but that's what I'm doing on my kick and snare. Then my top drums, you can see right here, if we solo this, if I compress too far, it's going to really smash that sound, and then you kind of lose those dynamics. But just a little bit, it's just catching those initial spikes. Sometimes when you have really, really loud music and you've got all those little peaks and stuff, some of those can get a little bit harsh to your ear, especially between like 3 to 6K in the frequency range. And I do that for like my top drums with all my hi-hats, shakers and stuff, just to kind of control them a little bit. Then on my basses, I added an OTT preset, super famous preset. It's part of the Ableton multi-band dynamics audio effect, and huge fan of this thing. Put it on a lot of stuff, a lot of bass sound design, a lot of leads, a lot of things. But putting a little bit on the group at like 12%, I felt like tightened everything. Right here with the ratios, the higher the ratio, the more compression is happening. I actually lowered these quite a bit so that they are not over compressing. So it's very soft compression, but you can turn up and down these bands. And it's basically kind of like, think of it like an EQ in a sense of where you're compressing and pushing stuff down based off the low frequencies, mid frequencies, and high frequencies. So that's kind of a nice way just to kind of control the mix. The best way to really know how something works is just to like use and abuse it and see what happens. So if I turn all the way the amount on this OTT, you can see everything's super bright and compressed. But if I take these bands, maybe I don't want it to be as bright. Let's turn this up. I could push and pull these downward compression on this top band above 3.25K. You kind of get the idea, and that's basically what OTT is doing. Upward and downward compression. You can do expansion and stuff. We don't need to get into that. And then I did a little bit of glue compression, just make some of the louder things a little bit tighter and quieter. Standard clip. So I really love this clipper. It's one of my favorite clippers. Obviously, you can use Ableton's clipper and the saturator device, but this thing's pretty solid. And I just clipped a little bit at the top and the loudest parts. So you can hear that right here. Let's see. You can see the tops are turning red. Anywhere there's a little bit of a red spike is clipping. And I chose hard clipping, and hard clipping is just a more aggressive version of clipping. So it's really great for like sound design on like basses or, you know, destroying a synth patch. Soft clip is a little more natural sounding, which is great for drums and other types of things that are really dynamic. So yeah, hard clipped that a little bit. And then for the utility, typically at the end of the chain, I have the limiter for all these groups that I'm limiting on. And I have the utility for this bass group. I have bass mono below 160 Hertz, which typically you want your frequencies, the sub low frequencies in the mix, to be in the center and not necessarily on the sides unless you're doing something really experimental. And so really the utility, this is just like a volume knob at this point. I'm just boosting the gain plus 6 dB or so into this ceiling. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're setting a ceiling and a limiter, kind of like in the diagram we looked at earlier, if you have it set to 0, you can have some intersample peak issues. So I might just take this and make this minus 0.03 over here. Obviously you can use Ableton's limiter, very similar. I just think Pro L2 sounds better, so I use it on buses and my master. Yeah, basically have the attack set to like 200 milliseconds or so, the release around 320 or so. So it's still not cutting off the initial spikes and transients, but the release is kind of holding the sustain, so it's leveling it out a little bit over time. And yeah, so just pushing that utility into there. If I'm boosting gain, I might want to go to the actual group and turn down the volume. Notice this is like minus 11, minus 12 because I am boosting. I have this makeup gain turned up on the glue compressor as well because as I'm compressing, I want to bring some of that volume back. So really just keeping an eye on your volume, make sure you're not destroying or slamming stuff too much unless you're getting really experimental and crazy on one of these individual tracks. I don't typically do that on the bus because I'm processing everything together. Just doing subtle compression and limiting. So let's just see what that looks like, how hard I'm limiting on this Pro L. So you can just see I'm only hitting like minus 2, minus 3 dB of gain reduction that's pushing down. And then I've got GM Audio Ducker. This is my favorite sidechaining device. I love this thing. It's low latency. And I have one for the kick and one for the snare. So every time those hit, it's telling this bass group to jump out of the way so those frequencies are not fighting each other. And then let's go to the leads group. So the leads, one of the most underrated things I think in mixing is dynamic EQs. Pro Q does that really well. There's version 4 now. I'm still on 3. But basically you can create a band and right click and say make dynamic. And then you can have it so when a certain volume level for that frequency, which right here is 3500 Hertz, if it gets too loud, it's going to push that down. Or if you want to boost it, then once it hits a certain level, it's going to actually make it go higher. But the nice thing about a dynamic EQ is rather than just doing a static cut, this is always going to cut frequencies no matter what's being played through this group. And there might be times at a certain point in the song when you want these frequencies to be present, and it might fill the space nicely in the overall mix. So a dynamic EQ is just a great way. It's a little automated volume threshold that's just pushing down that range of frequencies. So I did that here at 500 hertz, and I found that there was a lot of mud going on in the mix. There was a really good engineer I worked with, Corey Miller. He worked with Eminem and Old Dirty Bastard, B.O.B., a bunch of famous people. But he said that good engineers master the lows and the highs, but the best mastering engineers master the mid-range, because that's where our ears are mostly tuned in. Then you can see I also did a high pass filter. I cut off some of the low subs so that I had more space for the sub and the kick drum to breathe. I do a lot of filtering and cutting off the lows on individual tracks as well. You can see that in some of these. I did an EQ8 cutoff to like 200 hertz. That just allows more of that volume for your sub to come through cleaner, and you can get your mixes louder that way too by cutting certain frequencies you don't need. And then also in the leads, you can see I have an EQ8 and an envelope follower. You can create your own dynamic EQ by doing this. If you just create a band and then turn on the envelope follower, you can click the map button, map that to the volume, the gain of that band, and then turn up the gain. And when a frequency gets too loud in that area, the envelope follower will say, I'm going to push it down dynamically. So that's kind of how you can hack and create your own dynamic EQ in Ableton. If you don't want to buy ProQ or another plugin or whatever, save that money. And then I did a little bit of OT, only like 4%, just a tiny bit to just tighten and brighten the leads group. And then the utility, I did boost that gain into a Pro L2. You can see I did a little bit of limiting here, nothing too crazy, but just trying to control some of that overall loudness, especially in this verse when there's a lot of leads. So you can see some of that happening. And then I have sidechaining, just 2 different snare drums in the track. And I found that some of those snares were kind of losing some of their punch in the mid-range when it was fighting some of the lead sounds happening throughout the mix. Then on my vocals, just a little bit of glue compression, just a little bit to tighten those up. FX group, cut off anything low, subby that might be fighting, and then glue compress those. And that's pretty much it for the chord groups that I have with the processing. As I mentioned before, I'm routing the kicks and snare, top drums, the bass and leads only into these premasters. One advice I would give is if you open this up, then we can go in. I'm going to turn on oversampling 4 times. That's going to help with aliasing. You can do some research on that if you want. But then I just boosted up until I saw a little bit of more of that gain reduction happening into that ceiling. I'm going to go to the output. I'm going to set that at minus 0.05 here just to prevent those intersample peaks. And then I'm boosting it to plus 6.9. And then chain 1, we've got minus 12. So as I'm boosting this, I'm also turning down the chain volume to compensate. And I'm not doing anything too crazy on my pre-masters. I'm just really trying to make my master limiter work less hard and to just tighten everything up a little bit before it gets into my main master. You'll see that I set the monitoring to in for chain 1 and chain 2, so that the tracks are always listening to the incoming signal being routed, and then the group pre-masters going straight to the main. So you can kind of see what these look like. That's for my kick and my basses, and then chain 2 is going to be for the leads and the percussion, the top drums group here. Another thing to keep in mind is different attack and release times is going to kind of smoothen out the sound over time. But for chain 1, I wanted kind of a attack that's not going to be any faster than like 150, because then you cut off those transients, the punchiness of the kick and snare. Something to keep in mind. But hopefully this is helpful. There's no one perfect, one size fits all solution for bus processing and mixing. The next videos I'm going to talk more about my master track and the reasoning behind what I did on the master. But hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of how to gain stage things into your master.